has been temporarily called off after Santaco called the strike. It's emerged that taxi bosses have been called to a meeting with South African Taxi Finance Holdings in Kempton Park, east of Johannesburg. Taxi operators protesting over their vehicle financing brought traffic on most highways in Gauteng to a complete standstill this morning. Minibus taxis that were used to blockade the R80 Mabopane highway this morning have now started moving slowly towards the Pretoria CBD. Motorists travelling from the northern part of the city were caught in traffic jams caused by protesting taxi operators. The operators headed for the offices of the South African Finance Holdings, where they handed over a memorandum of grievances, including the high interest they pay on installments for their taxis. But the traffic on the R80 and Eskia Mpale roads is still slow, with thousands of taxi protesters driving slowly in the city. All right, for the latest, we're joined by our reporter, Criselda Lewis. Let's start with where you were on this traffic mayhem, it sounds like, this morning.
Absolute traffic mayhem since about 4 o'clock this morning, Francis, on all those major highways where we saw some of, the striking taxi drivers alleged to have hijacked some trucks from as early as midnight and started blockading roads. So at about 4 o'clock this morning,
so they actually hijacked trucks. They took the truck drivers out of their vehicles and took their vehicles. Is that what we're talking about?
Well, that's what we believe to have happened. They were allegedly accosted with some stones, also allegations that some firearms were pointed at these truck drivers, and they were told to get out of their vehicles, and basically drove the vehicles to block majority of the highways. And that's when we really saw the chaos. The traffic police had to move quite fast to ensure that the peak traffic this morning tried to move quite slowly as people were rushing to work. Many didn't make it.
You're talking about guns, hijacking. Do we know of anybody injured, harmed at the moment?
Not at this stage, but we did see one taxi driver who claims he was beaten up by police. This was after a group of men had gathered in Midrand, not far from the South African Taxi Industry Holdings offices, where they were supposed to hand over that memorandum of demands. Now, that did not happen. We understand that taxi bosses had received a telephone call and were called to a meeting following all of that chaos, which is currently underway in Kempton Park, where they're trying to find a solution to this impasse.
All right, just explain a little bit more. You were probably caught in the gridlock. What did you see for people in other provinces when you were out this morning?
Absolute mayhem. Hundreds, if not thousands, of cars parked on the highway. Majority of some of the taxi ranks that are usually a hive of activity. We have some of the largest in the Johannesburg area. Those were literally looking like parking lots. You had frustrated commuters who got out of their vehicles, started standing in the streets for up to 5-6 hours, and many having to call their employers to say they're not going to pitch for work because of the traffic chaos. We also know, of course, that the Gauteng Education MEC, Panyaza Lesufi, also announced early this morning that it was going to be impossible for many of the learners to get to school, so they decided to call it a day for schooling activity. But of course, the department will take into account that none of these kids will be penalized because some of them are actually writing examinations.
And I saw him tweeting and saying, I'm sorry this is so late. Authorities must have known this was coming, but I guess the degree, the disruption was highly unexpected.
Highly unanticipated, I must say, there, Francis, because remember, when you do apply for a permit of this nature to protest for whatever grievance, one of the strict rules that does apply is that there should not be any violence associated with that. So it really took us by surprise at 4 o'clock this morning when our sources called us and told us that they were stuck on the highway. So we rushed there, and basically it was just absolute chaos. And Santaco was saying it was the only way to demonstrate to those that they have grievances with that they're not going to let up. They want their demands to be met, and if not, they will not hesitate, even though they've now called the strike off to allow those negotiations to take place. They won't hesitate to return to the streets or even call a national strike.
And I think what they had applied for was a march, basically, not to hijack trucks and block highways. It sounds like police are quite angry as well.
Well, absolutely. I think it'll be very difficult for the taxi industry to be given another permit to march, because they were supposed to march from the Midrand CBD to the offices of the South Africa Taxi Finance Holdings, which is not too far from the CBD, and that did not happen. We saw all of this chaos unfold on all these major highways, and subsequently, you had quite a large police, both the South African Police Service as well as traffic police, tried to contain the situation, but every time they moved to one area, you'd find the taxis in quite a large group move to a different highway and start blockading the roads.
Yeah, it sounds just totally unacceptable on the surface of it. Okay, so they've called off the strike and they are at the Kempton Park Finance Holdings offices. Just explain the finance issue behind this all.
Well, what we do know is that over the past couple of months, the South Africa Taxi Finance Holdings, as well as the taxi bosses, have not been seeing eye to eye with regard to the repayments on their vehicles. The allegations that they're making is that they've got to pay about 28% interest on the vehicles, and you know that this is the company that finances the taxi industry. They're saying that many of them are
linked to government?
Not linked to government, but this is where the financing actually, if you want to buy a taxi, you would then go and apply for finance through this particular organization, and they service the taxi industry as it were. So what you find is that they're saying that majority of the taxis, the taxi owners, the taxi drivers are unable to pay back these large sums of money. They end up becoming blacklisted and their vehicles repossessed. They said they've been trying to hold negotiations with the concerned parties, but they've not been reaching common ground. So they said this was the last resort. They had to take to the streets to ensure that their demands are met.
All right, we're running out of time. Where to from now? Are we just waiting to hear what happens in those negotiations?
Well, I think commuters should really bank on the negotiations that are currently underway at Empress Palace in Kempton Park. And certainly if those negotiations fail, it certainly seems like we might be headed for a bigger strike, which might even be national. But what Santaco Gauteng is saying at the moment is that they will try to exhaust all options and hope that the stakeholders are able to meet them halfway, and perhaps that is something that could stave off the kind of chaos that we saw on the roads.
And a quick opinion, does this suggest that I'm trying to choose the words carefully, because I think if you have such a strong body, it really prevents public transport, other avenues of transport from developing in an area like Johannesburg. But from what you've seen, it just shows how massive parts of our population are reliant on taxis.
Absolutely.
With no alternatives, actually.
With no alternatives. That's why South Africa, many say, South Africa is still striving for a reliable transport system. Yes, many strides have been made with regard to the Gautrain and the new trains that were brought in by PRASA, but you could see millions of people. So when you have this kind of strike, it has massive ramifications for millions of people. So if you see a strike like this now escalating to a national level, which means that the country could come to an absolute standstill, because the ramifications would then mean, the ripple effect would be, is that you don't get schooling underway, you do not get the economy running, because people aren't able to get to work, and the employers do not have a basis to argue with their employees, because everybody could see that certainly there is a crisis within the transport sector in South Africa that certainly needs attention from government to step in as well.
All right, so hopefully you'll follow that for us, and we'll bring you the latest. Thank you very much, Griselda Lewis, SABC reporter.